We are 4 years into this war, and the most dangerous curve in Russia isn't on a map, it's on a spreadsheet. A line of irreversible losses climbing faster than the state can replace the men beneath it. Strip away the slogans and the parade footage, and you're left with an arithmetic problem that no press briefing can solve. In the first half of 2025, the casualty tempo became a metronome, steady, punishing, indifferent to speeches. The battlefield tells you why. Drones collapse the distance between detection and death. Artillery lost dwell time. Medevac routes turned into shooting galleries. What used to be survivable became terminal. That is how you burn through battalions without bending the front into anything that looks like a decision. This is FPV Explainer, where we break down the most fascinating stories in drone warfare. If you're enjoying this deep dive, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us what topic you want to see next. Your feedback shapes our future videos and keeps us bringing you clear, detailed analysis from the front lines. The claim that Moscow is running out of people isn't hyperbole, it's an operational observation. Recruitment spikes have flattened, even with payouts that once would have sounded unreal. The promise of money collides with a more powerful memory. Men who left for a 6-month stint and discovered there is no defined end date. Specialists who were told they'd fly drones or run comms and found themselves thrust into assault groups, rotations that never arrived, a phone that rings at home less often, then not at all. In this environment, a giant bonus reads like a funeral advance. Households make the same calculation again and again. No sum is worth a contract that quietly becomes indefinite. If you want to see the shape of the problem, look at the wounded to killed ratio. In modern combined arms warfare with competent evacuation, you expect multiple wounded for every dead. Here, across sector after sector, that ratio slumps toward 1 to 1.3. It's the signature of a battle space saturated with cheap precision, where a hit draws a second strike, and where a tourniquet buys minutes, not an extraction. A force that bleeds this way isn't merely losing numbers, it is losing the leadership lattice that keeps small units alive. Sergeants who taught men to move at night and radios to stay silent vanish from the roster, and what remains is volume without the skill to convert volume into maneuver. The domestic context drags the curve lower. This isn't a society on total war footing. City centers hum. The war is a broadcast backdrop, not a mobilizing drama. The gap between a country at leisure and units living under drones is not measured in kilometers. It is measured in trust. And trust is precisely what has evaporated. Families hear the same stories from different fronts. Contracts that morph after signing. Training that ends before it begins. Supplies that must be bought out of pocket. Commanders who can't protect a trench for 24 hours, let alone a tour. You don't fill an infantry roster with that reputation. You empty it.
All of this feeds a single thesis. Manpower is no longer a renewable resource for Moscow. You can raise bounties, you can widen the net, but without time to restore protected mobility, to densify electronic warfare at the edge, to relearn the choreography of breaching under smoke and suppression, the machine converts fresh bodies into names on a wall at roughly the same speed. The front moves by grid squares, and headlines claim momentum. Yet the attrition ledger reads like a slow-motion bankruptcy filing. Assets sold to pay interest, principal untouched. So the opening argument of this film is blunt. The Kremlin is hitting the human limits of its current approach. The drones don't care about speeches. The minefields don't care about bonuses. The evacuation corridor doesn't care about ideology. A country can pretend that time is cheap and people are plentiful, but the battlefield runs on physics and probability. In early 2025, those laws wrote the truth in cold ink. Russia is running out of the one resource it cannot counterfeit: trained, motivated, willing men. And unless the method of fighting changes, the curve will not. It will keep climbing, steady as a drum, until the roster is a list of ghosts, and the only thing left to mobilize is regret. The recruitment pipeline isn't a pipeline anymore. It's a shredder. What was advertised as a clean on-ramp, sign, train, deploy into a defined specialty has devolved into an indefinite commitment that starts with a pen stroke and ends, too often, in an unmarked field. The sales pitch is familiar. A year under contract, a seat in drones, comms artillery support, maybe medical. The reality reported across sectors is simpler and crueler. The contract behaves like a trap door. Once you sign, the term dissolves into until it's over, which never is. The promised role evaporates the moment manpower is short, which is always. You are diverted to assault infantry because assault infantry is the only currency the system knows how to spend at scale. Training reflects the same collapse of good faith. You don't get a season to harden a squad, synchronize radios, and rehearse night movement. You get 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes less, before you are pushed to the line. In a drone war, that gap is fatal. Skills that keep men alive under a hovering camera are muscle memory, not PowerPoint. Without time, units revert to behaviors that drones punish: bunching on the move, pausing on exposed microterrain, lingering on predictable routes, keying mics on dirty nets. Under those conditions, training complete is just a date on a clipboard. The battlefield hands out the real grades, and it grades in blood.
Equipment shortfalls turn the screw tighter. The myth that everything is provided collapses on contact with the first sergeant, who tells a new arrival to buy a radio out of pocket. Batteries, medical consumables, small UAV parts, these are not niceties, they are survival gear. When squads crowdsource kit and patch supply with volunteers, the front's most basic functions become intermittent. Medevac suffers first. A force that cannot protect or prioritize evacuation teaches every new recruit an ugly lesson on day one. If you're hit, help may not come. That message travels faster than any recruitment ad. Families hear it, communities hear it. The bonus on the poster begins to look like payment for a wake. Even where the state experiments with friendlier terms, better signing bonuses, acknowledgement of existing roles, no bait and switch, the success stories are bounded by a simple fact: they convert those already in uniform. They do not create a new generation of volunteers willing to absorb the drone era's risk profile. Why would they? The reputational damage is self-inflicted and structural. Men with relevant skills, UAV operators, medics, sappers, comms techs, read the same after-action accounts as everyone else. They see specialists push through assault lanes for a tour and never coming back to their craft. Expertise, which should be preserved and multiplied, is squandered to feed tempo. At the command level, rotation and release are where trust goes to die. The expectation of relief, after a tour, after a wound, after a year, keeps a fighting man tethered to discipline. If relief never arrives, discipline curdles into calculation. You start hearing the vocabulary of survival: keep your head down, don't volunteer, wait out the storm. This isn't cowardice, it's the rational response to a system that treats time as free and people as replaceable. When even severe wounds do not reliably produce demobilization, the message is unmistakable. The contract ends when the institution says it ends, not when the terms say it should. That erases the last pretense of a professional agreement and replaces it with indenture. Layered drones over that. The small sky is where the pipeline's lies are exposed. If you truly intend to keep a man on assault duty indefinitely, you owe him edge-dense electronic warfare, protected mobility, real smoke, rehearsed breaching, and a medevac corridor you can defend. He will see within hours whether those promises are real. He will count the quadcopters his squad has versus the ones he hears hunting over the tree line. He will learn how many minutes a tourniquet buys before a second strike finds the same grid. And when he calls home, if he can, he will describe what those minutes felt like. That call is your recruitment campaign. This is why the inflow no longer covers the outflow. The country is not short of men on paper, it is short of men willing to enter a system that cannot or will not keep its word. Money cannot solve a moral deficit. You can stack bonuses to the ceiling as long as contracts function like stop-loss in camouflage, as long as specialists are treated as disposable, as long as training is a speed bump and supply is a raffle, the line at the door will not lengthen. The few who still sign are either deeply committed or deeply cornered. Everyone else is doing the math the state pretends does not exist. Call this what it is, a breakdown of the human logistics of war. You cannot attrit your way through a drone age without protecting the only asset that truly compounds: experience. You cannot terrorize your own manpower pool into endurance and expect cohesion to hold. You cannot ask for indefinite sacrifice from soldiers while the rear lives as if the war is background noise. A pipeline is supposed to move people from recruitment to capability. This one moves them from signature to risk to disillusionment at speed. That isn't a pipeline. It's a conveyor to nowhere.
The mechanism of Russia's record losses isn't a mystery. It's a chain, and every link is sharpened. Start with the approach. The last kilometer used to be a blur of smoke, noise, and luck. Now it's a monitored corridor where every bush has a camera and every fold in the ground can cue a strike. Small assault packets step off in squads and half squads, carrying the weight of missions once reserved for companies. They move, they're spotted, they're fixed. The drone feed doesn't blink. A quadcopter hovers, tags the route, calls in an FPV. If the first hit misses, the second doesn't. The timeline from detection to detonation is measured in heartbeats, not minutes. And that simple contraction is why the casualty graph keeps climbing even when the front barely crawls. Suppression, the old shield, now flickers instead of holds. Artillery barrels don't sit and pound. They peck, scoot, and hide, rationing on-station time to avoid counter-battery and loitering munitions. Smoke comes late or thin, leaving gaps wide enough for drones to thread. The outcome at the point of contact is predictable. Assault groups are forced to cross the last 200 to 800 meters with intermittent cover and no sustained umbrella over their heads. A field that once belonged to mortarmen and machine gunners now belongs to quadcopters that can dive, correct mid-flight, and finish the wounded. What would have been a stretcher carry in another war becomes a black cross on a map square. Then comes the breach, or what passes for it. Proper breaching is choreography. Reduction, marking, shoulder security, protected mobility through lanes under smoke and suppressive fire. Too often the sequence is broken. Minefield reduction is partial, lane tape is irregular, dozers and plows arrive without the battery weight to keep enemy sensors down. Infantry drift, step off the lane by a meter, and a single misstep triggers a cascade. Blast, panic, pause, and the pause is the kill. The first FPV takes the lead man, the second goes after the rescuer, the third hunts the nearest parked vehicle, the fourth returns to the casualty point because the enemy knows someone will try again. Staff work, the invisible backbone of survivability, frays under the pace. This is a war of dozens of micro-assaults a day per brigade, each demanding ISR tasking, route deconfliction, counter-battery timing, EW coverage, resupply windows, and medevac contingencies. When turnover is constant and mid-level leaders are thinned by attrition, planning collapses into ritual. Units reuse the same gullies and hedgerows, key radios on the same dirty frequencies, and step off at roughly the same times because that's what the last rotation did. The defender watches, plots, and pre-aims. Predictability is not just a mistake, now it's a death sentence. Electronic warfare should be the tourniquet on this bleeding. Instead, it's a patchwork quilt. Some sectors hum with jamming for a few hundred meters. Others go silent exactly where it matters, the last bound to contact and the first 24 hours of consolidation. Without steady EW at the edge, every logistic act becomes a strikeable event. Water drops, battery swaps, ammo carries, relief in place, all are observed, queued, and fed into a pipeline of cheap precision that never tires. The result is that consolidation isn't a respite, it's an invitation. Positions won at noon are picked apart by dusk, and the men told to hold them learned the same lessons as the men who took them. Drones don't care who raised the flag.
Medevac is the pivot on which the wounded to killed ratio turns, and that pivot is under fire. Casualty points are surveilled, marked, and revisited. The old rule,
keep a man breathing for an hour and he'll live doesn't apply when second strike doctrine is baked into the enemy's SOP. Tourniquets buy minutes, minutes draw drones, drones finish what shrapnel began. That is why the ratio slumps toward 1 to 1.3. It isn't a statistic pulled from thin air, it's the arithmetic of a battlefield where evacuation is hunted and where the shortest path to a hospital is a camera's straight line. Overlay force quality and you get the final twist. Short training cycles create squads that haven't built the muscle memory to move under constant watch. They bunch when they should disperse, pause where they should sprint, and talk when they should go dark. Experienced NCOs who would throttle that behavior in the first hour are precisely the people this war erases first. Each missing sergeant is a hole in the unit's immune system, and drones exploit those holes with machine efficiency. Put the links together and the chain is complete. Approach under eyes, breach under partial fires, consolidate under hovering cameras, evacuate under repeat strikes. Repeat across sectors without operational pause, with artillery that can't dwell and EW that can't blanket. You don't need grand theory to explain the graph. You need a stopwatch, a drone feed, and a casualty log. The system as built converts contact into deaths at every phase, and it does so faster than a manpower pool, however large on paper, can regenerate skill. That is the mechanism. That is why the losses look the way they do. And unless the choreography changes, denser edge EW, real smoke and suppression, protected mobility that actually arrives, staff work that breaks pattern, the chain will keep turning, link by sharpened link, through another tour and another roster until the map moves inches while the country buries miles. Here is where the threads tie off, and the picture stops being a puzzle and becomes a verdict. If the first chapter showed the curve, irreversible losses rising faster than replacements, if the second exposed the recruitment system that promises certainty and delivers a trapdoor, and the third walked you meter by meter through a kill chain that punishes every phase of combat, then this final chapter is the consequence. Not abstract, not theoretical, the consequence measured in what an army can still do, how long it can do it, and what it burns to keep doing it at all. An army lives on 3 clocks. The first is the tactical clock, seconds and minutes in the last kilometer. Russia is losing that clock to drones and to the erosion of sergeants who once turned panic into movement. The second is the operational clock, weeks and months to rebuild cohesion, rotate battered units, restore artillery dwell and protected mobility, rehearse breaching properly. That clock keeps being skipped. There is no real pause, only a stutter, so formations return to the line with new faces and old problems. The third is the strategic clock, years to regenerate trust, train leaders, and convince a nation that the exchange rate, lives for grid squares, means something. That clock has barely started, and already the audience at home has changed the channel.
When those clocks drift out of sync, you get what we see now. Advances that register on a map, but not in momentum. Casualty curves that are too steep to flatten with cash, and a recruitment base that recognizes the system's promises as conditional at best. The country is not out of men on paper. It is out of men willing to be consumed by a machine that cannot keep its contract, either the legal one about terms and roles, or the moral one about preparation, protection, and relief. You can coerce bodies back into the line. You cannot coerce competence, initiative, or trust. Those compound only with time, and time is the resource the current approach spends most casually. Listen to the math the battlefield is already whispering. If the wounded to killed ratio stays pinned near 1 to 1.3, if artillery remains intermittent and breaching is more ritual than choreography, if evacuation corridors are hunting grounds and electronic warfare at the edge remains a patchwork, then the exchange rate does not improve. The front will still move. It will just move in a way that mortgages the next 6 months of leadership.
for the next 6 days of headlines. That is how you run out of people without running out of uniforms. That is how a large army becomes a thin army long before it becomes a small one. There is a way to bend the curve, and it has nothing to do with posters or payouts. It begins with admitting what the fight has become: observation strike warfare, in which drones write the first draft of fate. It means stacking jammers at the edge, not in the rear, restoring real smoke and suppression to the last bound, keeping breaching kits on station until the lane is not only cut, but held, protecting medevac like it's a strategic asset, because it is. It means giving units a genuine operational pause to relearn muscle memory and rebuild the non-commissioned backbone that keeps squads alive. And it means telling the truth about terms and roles, then honoring that truth, even when the line is hungry. None of that is glamorous. All of it is cheaper than losing another generation of small unit leaders to a camera and a battery pack. If that reset doesn't happen, the path is already sketched. The state will widen the net again. The inflow will look large on paper and thin on contact. Assault packets will repeat the same timings along the same hedgerows into the same hovering lenses. The ledger will swell with names that never reach a hospital, and the force will keep swapping experience for mass until there is little of either left. That is what running out of people really means. Not a sudden cliff, but a slope you don't feel until you try to climb. The final image to hold is simple: a square kilometer of ground, a box you can walk in under an hour. Ask what it costs to color that box. Ask how many liters the next attempt will cost to keep it. Then ask how many such boxes make a victory, and how many trained, willing men remain to fill them. If the answers don't change, the outcome won't either. The curve will continue, the clocks will drift, and an army that once relied on depth will find itself scraping the bottom, not of its map, but of its people.